Yeah, so speaking of value, if I am the individual that has asked you to do this, does it mean that I'm committing to a whole, huge, big elephant of a project, or is it customizable?
It is 100% customizable, and we see these in all shapes and sizes. We see these from the company with 2 people in the accounting department, or even 1 person doing things off QuickBooks, versus huge companies with multiple people in the accounting department. And we see that in size, and we also see within these the opportunity to say, hey, I really just want to focus on revenue, cash in, cash out. Let's focus on revenue. Let's focus on payables. And then let's think through the reporting side. Or, you really can pick and choose. What do you want to look at? Is there a particular concern over, hey, we only have 1 person currently right now running payroll? We really want to do a deep dive there and look into that. And these can take on, any manner of shape and size in terms of how deep do you want us to go in the review and all of that. And so that I think is really beneficial. And we do a good job. I want to brag on the team here about staying in close communication, saying, here's where we are, this is what we're seeing. Do you want to continue on? Do you want to stay where we are? Making sure we're adding that right level of value to clients.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one thing we do well is communication and transparency, because in these projects, the first question people always have is, what's the cost? What's the value to me? Why can't I do it myself? And I would say there are a lot of companies that probably could do it themselves. The point that I like to make is, but would you? Would you sit down and take the time? Would you allocate a resource and take them from critical things to documentation things? Also, a thing to think about is if a resource is currently exploiting the company in some form or fashion, or the opportunity is there and they don't necessarily want it to discovered, they would be able to document in a way that would not out that information, correct?
Correct. And I find too, just being a third party impartial person, you tend to get more information than the internal people. And, we're coming in with no preconceived notions as to how things are operating and this is what's supposed to occur. We just go in with a bunch of probing questions, just genuinely trying to understand, how is it currently working? We certainly can't make suggestions specific to your organization with your specific workforce, specific system, if we don't know what's currently happening and what the results are from that process.
Yeah, I like to call that friendly fire.
You do, yes.
We come in with a mentality that's on your behalf, but to poke holes for the good of the company a bit. Now, speaking of poking holes, it's not necessarily painful, but it does result in a lot of information that we deliver in a report. Can you tell me a little bit about what the deliverable would be?
Sure. So every business process review has what we'd call like an issues log as the meat and bones of the report. And it really outlines, here's the observation, here's what we saw, here's the risk related to that observation. And in our opinion, we would say low, moderate, high, we would rank that. And then we would say tailored to you all. And I mentioned this a moment ago, specific to the workforce you currently have, the system you currently have. This is what we would suggest as a way to remediate or address this issue, because the perfect answer in a perfect world is always, right, well, add somebody new or get a new system. Well, that's just not feasible 99.9% of the time. And so we really try to say, how can we leverage the existing resources you already have? And how can we make this as efficient and effective as possible without committing you to spending unlimited funds going forward? And so that's the meat and bones of the report. And then oftentimes, in the vast majority of cases, we see where companies are asking us to document their current state. And so that serves as a narrative, an appendix to the report saying, okay, here's what you told us is currently happening. And we find that pretty much every company chooses to add that as in addition to that issues log we talked about, because one, it's knowledge, should there be an employee who's out a day, a lot of people don't have all that documented well. And so it gives them something to reference, and it also gives a good benchmark of here's where we were, that type of thing. So,
in addition to that, I think it's important to say that it also is a training tool for resources that are being reallocated within the organization, or if somebody comes in from outside, there's this ramp up time that always happens. But if you have the narrative in place, you have good policies, procedures documented, then they kind of have, here's your marching orders, and then, any additional questions they can be asked. Now, you said something that I wanted to go back to. You said, kind of no preconceived notions. But one of my favorite stories to tell is that one time we did a business process review for an organization that had already discovered fraud. However, when we were engaged in the opportunity to do the business process review, Sarah Beth came in and was doing the documentation. Can you tell a little bit more about that?
Yeah, these are not the ideal situation, right? Because you feel like you're getting a report card at the end of
Right.
it. But I sat down and we started having the conversations, and just based on experience of doing these often, and just having, just picking up on things that you can in person in discussions. I left after a meeting, and I called Amy and I said, Amy, I think there may be a bigger conversation we need to have here. And I don't know anything definite. Something doesn't feel right with what I'm hearing. Let's have a conversation. And
which I would say Sarah Beth is part bloodhound, and other members of the team kind of have this aspect to their personality where there are flags, right, that kind of pop up that you see. One of the ones I talk to people a lot about is, hey, if the same person cutting the checks is signing the checks, or just little tiny things that can present big problems, correct?
Right. Okay. Yeah, and it's not just one thing, right? Because in that example you gave, which is absolutely a red flag, there's a lot of situations where there's one person, period, who can do that. And so sure, understandable, but it's when you can paint the picture of, there's these 17 little things that when you paint the picture, something just doesn't feel right. It doesn't add up. Yeah, when you're like, okay, let's add all this up. What's the answer? And we are very cognizant to never go in and say, well, we think it's fraud by any, nobody wants to be the person raising that flag, but just to say something just doesn't feel right here. I just want to gauge everyone's comfort level for risk and understanding of, hey, there's some segregation of duties issues that are across multiple processes, and this is what we're seeing, and the risk, is there any concerns you have? Yeah. Because quickly, if there is, that can take a different shape and form of an engagement.
And I think it's important to say that there are risks that companies can assume, right?
Absolutely.
The report doesn't say, here is how you have to do it. The report says, hey, here are the potential issues, and then here are possible ways that they can be addressed. Can the company say, well, yeah, that's good for us, though. It works for us?
Absolutely. I think, and that's something we encourage, truthfully, in the meetings, is to say, let's talk cost benefit. Our job is to point out where the holes are, where the potential is. And then we can say together, let's talk through, okay, we view this as a high risk item, and let's see what can we figure out that makes sense for you all to address. Does it make sense on a low risk item to say, we're just going to live with this? It may, and there's obviously, our job is not to stay and make sure it was all implemented and done correctly, which we can do. But in this sense of our job is to say, we want to help you what's most effective and efficient for your organization. And in some cases, management, ownership may come and say, we just don't think this, cost benefit for us. We know it's a risk, but quite frankly, we're willing to assume it. And that's completely in everyone's prerogative. I just think it gives everyone more peace of mind to even know it's there than to be blindsided by it later.
Well, there's power in having it documented and saying this is a risk we assume. And so if something does occur because of it, we've accepted that risk, essentially. Right.